Hello, ninth grade. Okay, this is our 8th poem. Poem number 8 is I Hear America Singing by Walt Whitman. You should be listening to this on Thursday, March 26th. And again, make sure that you have logged in to Common Lit and you've completed all of the parts of Common Lit before you listen to this video. And that's your last Common Lit before spring break. Yay! Congrats! Okay. So, this poem, I Hear America Singing by Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman is a very famous poet. He was writing around the time of the Civil War, and he is largely credited for creating or inventing free verse, okay? Which you can definitely see is happening here with this poem. And free verse, remember, if you look back at your terms, is just that there's no set rhyme scheme and there's no set meter. So it's kind of almost taking away what we think of when we think of poems, you know, because a lot of times when you think of poems, you think of a set meter, you think of a set rhyme scheme, you think of stanzas. And so Walt Whitman kind of turned all that on its ear. And again, this was around the time of the Civil War, so mid-1800s. Emily Dickinson was writing around that same time period on the other end of the scale. She was taking things and condensing it, whereas his poems are very long and almost rambling. Hers are very tight and very controlled, but she was playing around with, and we'll talk about her later, but she was playing around with some stuff as well that had to do with odd or unusual capitalization or punctuation, and definitely very elliptical, leaving things out. So the two of them are often credited as sort of being the precursors for what will become modern poetry, particularly for Whitman in the sense of free verse. Okay, and so what he's doing then, if you don't have rhyme scheme, if you don't have a set meter, then what makes it a poem? You know, how is it sort of holding together? So what he's using here in this poem is a technique called, I can't write with this, cataloging. Okay, that looks terrible. Cataloging. Okay, I really need to get one of those pens. I've got one on order, but it's not coming until spring break. Apparently every teacher in the universe has ordered one. I have one, a stylus, but it's a thick one. Okay, so cataloging is basically just a list. He's listing a lot of stuff out, okay? And you see that as you read the poem. So let's have a listen. I hear America singing, the varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his as it should be, blithe and strong. The carpenter singing his as he measures his plank or beam. The mason singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work. The boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat. The deckhand singing on the steamboat deck. The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench. The hatter singing as he stands. The woodcutter's song. The plowboy's on his way in the morning, or at noon intermission, or at sundown. The delicious singing of the mother, or of the young wife at work, or of the girl sewing or washing. Each singing what belongs to him or her and to none else. The day what belongs to the day. At night, the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing with open mouths their strong, melodious songs. Okay, so let's look at what this poem's talking about. Obviously, he's pretty clear on it right from the beginning. It's talking about hearing America singing, but why are they singing? Okay, he goes through, and pretty much all of this has to do with singing while working. And I know that that's really unusual in today's time, but back in the day, there used to be a lot more singing while working. And now, a lot of times, you'll see people in there, they're still listening to music. We love music. But they often will have in, earbuds or something like that. Or maybe they're piping in music over, some kind of system if they're working in retail or something. But back in the day, you associated a lot of different types of work with different songs. And if you think about it, you've probably heard some of them. I know when Dylan and Thomas were little, I had these 2 cassettes. Yeah, we're pretty old. I had these 2 cassettes that we would keep in the car, and they were called like children's sing-alongs or something like that. And I know there was one of them that was Whistle While You Work. And there was another one that was, I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day. Y'all have heard those, right? I'm not sure why they thought toddlers should listen to songs about working on the railroad, but there you go. And so singing, especially when doing these sort of like more monotonous types of jobs, would make the time pass. And sometimes it even had more of a purpose. For instance, if you think about it, I'm going to hit the table, so hopefully this isn't going to be too loud. But if you think about it, if you've got people on either side of, setting up a railroad, and they've got those huge hammers. You've probably seen pictures of this in videos, right? They've got these huge hammers, and they're singing and like, I've been working on the railroad. Because you've got one person on either side with those big hammers driving those huge railroad spikes in. And so if they're singing, then they're keeping a certain tempo. Because you don't just have one person on one side hammering, you got two going, so it's happening faster, but you certainly don't want them to both hit at the same time. So singing actually kind of kept a tempo going. So sometimes it mattered for tempo reasons. You still see this at use today. I don't know if y'all ever do it, maybe when you're out, doing PT and stuff like that, but I'm sure you've seen on TV and movies with the military, or you've heard our junior college cadets singing cadence while they're running, right? They've got all these different little songs to it. Why do they do it? Well, it makes the time pass because running's not a whole lot of fun, and it keeps a steady tempo, right? It keeps everybody on beat. So that's kind of why he's talking about singing, if you were confused by that. So as he's going through, and he says there are lots of different varied carols or songs. And so he says he hears mechanics singing. Of course, we know what mechanics are. They work on any type of machines or engines. So at that time period, again, we're talking about Civil War. So you wouldn't be thinking car mechanics, okay? But you'd be thinking railroad, more than likely. The carpenter, of course, we know what that is. A carpenter is somebody who works with wood, right, to build a house or something like that. The mason, we learned about masonry whenever we read Cask of Amontillado, right? Masons are people who work with brick or with stone. The boatman singing his on his boat, or the deckhand on the steamboat deck. So you've got people who are out working these boats. Because again, you got to remember, Civil War time, most of the supplies were getting to people not through, in today's time. I know you've seen stuff in the news about thanking truckers because, they're saving us. They're the ones who, they're working overtime to get supplies back in the stores and all of that. But in this time period when Whitman's writing, all of that had to be done through railroad and through steamboats going up and down the Mississippi River. So that's how, and other rivers as well, that's how you had goods being transported. That's why so many towns grew up around either a railroad or Milledgeville, a river, because that's how supplies were going to get to you. So that's why he's mentioning those, the boatman and the deckhand, because they're bringing in those supplies. The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench. Shoes were actually made by hand. This is before, we had everything industrialized and everything was being made in factories. So they literally would cut out the leather and hand sew it. So he's sitting on his bench. The hatter singing as he stands. And that was a whole job right there, too, being a hatter, because back then everybody wore hats outside. In the military, we still hold that tradition over. You walk outside, you got to put that hat on. But back in the day, that was true for pretty much everybody. If you walked outside, you were supposed to have a hat on. So hats were a big thing. The woodcutter, somebody's got to cut down the wood, right? You didn't have electricity yet, so you got to have wood for heat, but you also got to have wood for cooking. You got to get those stoves heated up, even if it's July and it's 98 degrees outside. You're gonna have to stoke up the stove if you're gonna cook something. The plowboy singing on his way in the morning or at noon intermission or at sundown. So you've got people who are out there plowing the fields, getting ready to plant. And then the singing of the mother or of the young wife. Now when it says at work, it means like doing housework around the house. Or the young girl sewing or washing. Each singing what belongs to him or her and to none else. Now this is what's so fascinating about Whitman. Even though he was writing in the mid-1800s, Whitman was so far ahead of his time. A lot of the stuff that he wrote about was very much anti-slavery, and it really was almost considered feminist, because you have to think about the fact that at his time, mid-1800s, to have listed out housework, which would be, considered, of course, at that time women's work, was unheard of. Nobody would have put a mother working, or a young wife doing the housework, or a girl sewing or washing. Nobody but Whitman would have listed that along with all of these other jobs that were being performed outside of the house by males. But Whitman did. Again, he's considered almost a feminist because he saw women as equals. And so he saw their contribution to America and what makes America run as an equal part of keeping everything going, right? Fascinating that he did that so long ago. I mean, he was very much ahead of his time. The other thing that was so far ahead of his time was his pronoun use here. Up until literally when I was growing up, so like in the late 70s and early 80s when I was in school, you still, if you were referring to a group of people and you did not know whether they were male or female, you were supposed to use the male pronoun, period, the end. And it was just supposed to be understood that 51% of the population that wasn't listed was included. So, there hence expressions like every man for himself, when really what it means is every person for himself or herself, or as is evolving in today, their self, or themselves, excuse me. So that, the fact that he said him or her was huge. I mean, somebody could write some really cool science fiction about Walt Whitman being some sort of like a time traveler from the future and going back and writing this stuff, because that's just, it blows you away. Nobody would have said to him or her. Everybody would have just said to him, even if they thought to include the work that the women were doing to keep America running. So that fascinates me that he does that. So then he says here in this next part, the day, what belongs to the day. So all of that up above was songs that you would hear in the daytime, songs of people working, right? People going about their jobs, whether that be outside the house or inside the house, all of the things that are keeping America running. But he then switches to the last, at night, the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing with open mouths their strong, melodious songs. So what do you think he's talking about there? We're not talking about working anymore. Now he's talking about a group of guys getting together, probably at their local tavern or pub or something like that, and drinking songs, basically. Like, I know another song kids all grow up is the, 99 bottles of beer on the wall, or milk, or whatever, you turned it into for your family. That was originally a drinking song. And so, nowadays, if you go to like a sports bar or something like that, there's TVs on everywhere, so everybody's kind of watching stuff. But back then, people would strike up in song. And so he's talking about the nighttime where you've got the young fellows getting together and singing and just kind of enjoying each other's company after a long day of work. So I really like this poem because I feel like it's a good picture of America. You almost, if you wanted to make like a video to go along with this poem, you could almost see it being like little snapshots of people working. And then you've seen stuff like this. You've seen this technique where it would be lots and lots of different pictures of people working like all over America. And then it zooms out and all those little pictures get pixelated into like a big map of America. Do you know what I'm talking about? I could really see that working for this poem because he's talking about these individual songs and carols, and he's mentioning how that all, works together to be what America is. Okay, and so I just think that's really cool. So looking at the actual literary elements, we've already talked about cataloging and free verse in with this poem. Of course, like I just was telling you, I think you have some pretty clear images. I think imagery really comes through. Like I was saying, how you could picture all of these different jobs going on across America, and then. Yeah, we mentioned the free verse and cataloging. Yeah. So we don't get a whole lot of a feel for the actual speaker here. because he's kind of just reporting on America. You know what I mean? He's just kind of talking about what America is. So you do get the feeling he is an American who is celebrating America. So you could certainly say that. But that's that poem. Now, my advanced has to do an additional assignment for this, a written assignment, and turn it in. Those of you who are not in advanced don't have to, but you might want to do the part that they're going to do next to compare this. You don't have to write anything, but just for fun, if you're just sitting at home at bored, go to YouTube and search Alabama 40-hour week. That's the official video. If you can find the official video, it'll say that next to it. I looked for it. And that is a song your parents will probably recognize. I remember hearing it growing up, even though I'm not really a country music fan, but Alabama's a huge country music group. I mean, you couldn't grow up in the 80s and not know who Alabama was. And so that song, though, I think has a whole lot in common with this poem. So my advanced has to look at it, and you got to write your response and submit it to turn it in. But the rest of y'all might want to take a look as well, just for fun, just to see the comparison here. Again, that's and it's a music video, so I mean it's not longer than like 3 or 4 minutes. But it's Alabama 40-hour week, and again, you're looking for the official video on that. Okay, I hope y'all are staying well.